Welcome environmental systems students to the Dallas Independent School District's STEM Environmental Education Center. We'd like to give a special welcome to the students at Wilmer Hutchins High School. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. We know you can't be here in person, but we are going to do our best to make you feel like you're here virtually, and we're even going to take a little trip over to White Rock Lake this morning and show you some things from that part of Dallas. If you are watching this and you haven't registered yet, you can still register for this field trip by going to www.tiny.cc/EEC register to get yourself or your class registered for this field trip. We just use that information for our attendance purposes. And today's field trip is going to be about the impact of human activities on the environment. So during this virtual field trip, students will evaluate the effect of human activities, including habitat restoration projects, species preservation efforts, Nature Conservancy groups, hunting, fishing, ecotourism, all-terrain vehicles, and small personal watercraft on the environment. We're going to start off today's field trip by discussing habitat restoration. Then you're going to see a case study about White Rock Lake. Next, we'll discuss Nature Conservancy groups. Then we'll discuss hunting and fishing. And last, we will discuss recreational vehicles. While we're doing all of that, you can ask us questions. But since this is a virtual field trip, you can't just raise your hand and be called on. Instead, you'll go to www.tiny.cc/EEC-question-answer. You'll fill out a very short form to ask us any questions you have about the impact of human activities on the environment, and you can ask as many questions as you like, and we will do our best to answer all of them in the time that we have with you this morning. So let me stop sharing my screen here, and we'll get started with habitat restoration projects with Ms. Nash.
Welcome to my classroom, students. Today we're talking about habitat restoration. To restore something means to take it back to what it was before. So the habitat includes the plants, animals, fungi, everything that's out there in a certain place. So animals like our quail have been severely impacted by changes to their habitat. The original habitat was what we call the blackland prairie. And out here in Sigville, we've also got post-oak savanna. So savanna is a mixed woodland with post oaks and also grasses. So the prairie ecosystems are the most endangered in North America. They once stretched from Texas up into Canada. They were home to gigantic herds of bison, the largest herd of grazing animals ever to exist on planet Earth, the American bison herd. And they're supported by a wide variety of grasses. So I've got some Indian grass here with some flowers from my garden blooming now in the fall. These fall bloomers are important for our migrating monarchs. You may have seen them in the parks around town. Lots and lots of animals depended on that. Prairies did the indigenous people who lived here, who ate those animals and the other plants that grew in the prairies. So yesterday was Indigenous Peoples Day, and it's a good time to think about how they manage our continent, mainly through fire. And natural fires burned, of course, there was no fire department to put them out. And they also set fire intentionally. This grass is fire adapted. They wanted grass because that's what the buffalo ate. And the grass comes right back. The trees do not. So when European settlers came, they suppressed fire and they brought in other animals. They brought in invasive plants like our nemesis, the Johnson grass. Some things were brought in intentionally, others not. They plowed up the prairie, they built cities, and we have just little remnants that's left over to be able to look and see what used to be here. So I'm going to attempt to show you some pictures I took around here and also White Rock Lake, and also okay, let's see. Where did it go? What should I do now? No.
I think click on the tab at the top there that says Restoration Google Slides.
Okay,
Yep,
okay.
there you go.
It disappeared on me. Okay. Now what? No. I give up. Okay, I just give up. It won't work. It will not work.
Just click done. It'll work. Click done there.
Done. Where's done?
It's blue. It's in blue.
Click on it. I click on it, and
You're good.
but where did it go? It disappeared again.
No, it's we can see it now.
So
If
you
click
can present. I'm not sure. Not sure.
now click done.
This one, present.
Oh God. Okay, I apologize. I need to get a different a different world of mine. Here's what I tried to do here with the Indian grass. We tried to do a restoration project. The problem is you have to get rid of the Nemesis Johnson grass and the Bermuda grass, but we have had limited success. The Indian grass is here. The problem is to manage the mowing, okay, and also to have people understand the difference between Johnson grass and Indian grass. Here's our beautiful goldenrod that the butterflies like. Here's some mist flower from my garden with the monarchs on it. At White Rock Lake, they just stopped mowing, and as a result, a lot of the original plants came back. Here's a beautiful funnel-webbed spider with her little egg case there, another spider web, some liatris, our state grass, the Cytoxgrama, some salvias, and here's the yucca. And this is a real interesting thing at White Rock Lake. They kept mowing and mowing. The yucca didn't actually die, but they stopped flowering because they would cut off the flowering stalks. And as a result, the moth that used to pollinate those flowers had nothing to, no nectar, and they disappeared. When they stopped mowing, the yucca now flower beautifully all over the prairie, but there's no moths, so the yuccas no longer set seeds. This is a good example of obligate relationships. Okay, in other words, there's only one animal that pollinates this plant. Here's some Canadian wild rye. And in the post-oak reserve, we have what we call savanna. We have little pocket prairies, remnants, and again, Indian grass surrounded by a wall of trees. Here's Miss Ramirez showing you how tall that grass is over her head. Some lichen, lots of diversity. And you can see here the bunch grass. Okay, so they grow in bunches, not a carpet. And that allows little birds and invertebrates and invertebrates, lizards to run through the grass. And here's a little blue stem meadow out in the post oak. Again, you can see the wall of trees, and particularly the cedar coming in to shade out the grass. On the edges of these little meadows, we have plants like the viburnum, a little understory tree with fruit for the birds for fall migration. The sumac, beautiful fall color, again, seeds for the birds, and the Maxine sunflower. So lots of ways to restore a habitat. One way is to kill off all the invaders and then replant. In the case of White Rock Lake, they just stopped mowing. So thank you, and that, and now I go to tab and stop sharing. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing, and any questions you can ask Mr. Broughton.
Thank you very much. Those are great pictures that you showed. I'm going to share my screen now to show you a short video from White Rock Lake, and it's a case study of restoring a habitat, or kind of preserving it as well.
Good morning from White Rock Lake in Dallas, Texas. White Rock Lake's history is rich and varied. It was constructed in 1911 as a water source for the city of Dallas. As the city grew, the lake was unable to meet the city's water demands, and Lake Louisville became the city's water source. In 1929, White Rock Lake became a city park. From the 1930s to the 1950s, people flocked to the lake to swim, fish, sail, camp, and boat. In 1952, swimming was banned, and in 1958, city ordinance banned boats with engines greater than 10 horsepower. With greater than 1,000 acres, the White Rock Lake of 2020 is an urban oasis enjoyed by more than 1 million people each year. However, this recreational lake has been heavily impacted by silt issues and human pollution. Thus, it provides a perfect case study related to human activities' impact on environmental systems. To begin, let's define some key words. Silt is defined as earthy matter, fine sand, or similar that is carried by moving or running water and deposited as sediment. Silting is the process by which a body of water becomes filled or blocked with silt. White Rock Lake has a history of problems with silting. Dredging is to remove silt and other materials from the bottom of a body of water. Urban pressures offer insight to the silting issues at White Rock Lake. The lake's watershed is a narrow 100-mile square band along the 30-mile White Rock Creek that stretches from far north Frisco through Plano, Richardson, and North Dallas and feeds into the lake. As the urban watershed became developed, vegetation and land are stripped off to build highways, houses, and the like. When it rains, this ravaged soil washes into the creeks and tributaries that flow into the lake as silt. The explosive growth of the Metroplex had enormous impact, and the lake became what is known as clogged. This problem is addressed by dredging. Again, the removal of silt and other material from the bottom of the lake. White Rock Lake has undergone multiple dredgings, with the first in 1937. By the 1990s, the lake's silt and sediment buildup had reduced the depth at its northern edge to less than 1 foot. Grassroots efforts led to a successful bond campaign to address the lake's problems. The bond raised 1/2 of the money needed, and the city committed the other half of the funds to dredge the lake. A hydraulic dredge is basically a big vacuum cleaner that sucks up the water and silt and discharges a slurry mix. The dredging process took 9 months, and recent retesting indicates that the lake at this time is not resilting as quickly as in recent years. Ongoing monitoring must continue, as unchecked resilting can lead to the lake becoming so shallow that it could turn into a marsh or wetland or bog. The environmental impacts of that would be enormous. The preservation of White Rock Lake's health and beauty benefit both the people, the habitats, and the wildlife. Things done individually have drastic effects when looked at in the aggregate. Each of us must acknowledge our individual and collective impact on environmental systems such as White Rock Lake. I hope you'll have the opportunity to come out and enjoy it soon.
Oops, let me, there we go. So again, that video came from one of our volunteers here, Ms. Bernstein, who shared that. And I have been to White Rock Lake many times and did not know all of that information about that lake. So that was very interesting. All right, now we're going to move on to Nature Conservancy efforts with Mrs. Fuller.
Good morning. We're going to be talking about nature conservation groups and conservation in the light of ecology means the preservation, the protection, and the restoration of wildlife habitat and the natural environment. So another big focus of these nature conservation groups is stewardship. Stewardship is taking care of something that does not belong to you. The world does not belong to us. It belongs to our children and our grandchildren. We want to make sure they have a beautiful world. And so one of the ways we can do it is by being active as citizens to make sure that things are preserved. So we're going to start off by talking about the Nature Conservancy itself. It's got a name that's right in there with this. This was founded in 1951. The mission of the Nature Conservancy is to conserve the lands and waters on which all life depends. They're active in 79 countries and territories around the world. They are very active in education. There's a lot of outreach to middle school and to high school people. They work all over the world to make things beautiful. We've got some posters over here. If you join, they'll be glad to send you a calendar, and then of course you would get their monthly magazine, which talks about conservancy issues and efforts all over the world. So it's an excellent organization, and they do very good work, and they're very active in Texas actually. And should have a picture here of something that they did down in South Texas. Well, can't find it. I lost my bookmark. Okay, so anyway, high school and middle school kids can actually be involved with projects of buying property in South America and preserving it. And they're active in Texas, like over in West Texas, where they've got some areas that need to be protected because of endangered species. And they help Texas, not just the whole world, but also us, preserve our natural habitat. The next group we're going to talk about is the National Wildlife Federation. They were started in 1936, and they have what's called a common agenda as opposed to a mission statement. Their common agenda is to protect, restore, and connect wildlife habitat. That restoration of the connection of habitat is so important. Habitat fragmentation is disastrous to animals that migrate and that also have wide range living affiliations. They want to transform wildlife conservation with wildlife management. They want to defend public trust resources. Just because it's protected now doesn't mean it's going to be protected next year or the year after that. And they want to confront stressors to the environment, such as global climate change, invasive species, wildlife disease. In a minute, you're going to hear about the deer wasting disease that's in the deer population in Texas, and also the wasting disease in the elk in the Rocky Mountains. They're going to connect Americans, that's us, with wildlife. They're going to broaden the stewardship ethic. In other words, help everybody understand this is our job, not just the federal government or just these special organizations. They're in conservation action, public and private investments, and they support policy changes necessary to save thousands of at-risk species. So I'm going to show you a picture. These are antelope on public land, and they got trapped in a blizzard and froze to death because private ranchers who had leased the land put up fences. And when the blizzard struck, they couldn't get past the fences. So the National Wildlife Federation took the federal government to court to force them to get those fences taken down to protect our natural animal resources, and in this case, the antelope. So they do very good work. The next one we're going to look at is the Audubon Society. It was named after John James Audubon. His mission in life was to draw and paint every bird in the United States, well, what is now the United States in North America. And they have an excellent magazine. They're very committed to birds and other wildlife as well, and also habitat preservation and restoration. They're real big on photography. They even have an issue every year called the photography issue, and they have a contest where they challenge youth. They challenge amateur photographers as well as professional photographers to submit pictures of birds, and then they're awarded a prize, and of course the recognition in the national magazine. And all of these efforts bring to the forefront what the animals look like, where they live, their importance. It shines a spotlight on the birds and on the other wildlife as well. It's an excellent organization. We've got two wonderful resources right here in the Dallas area. We have Dogwood Canyon down in Cedar Hill, which is a wildlife area where you can go and hike and have a calming time in nature. And then we also have TRAC, which is the Trinity River Audubon Center over here close to Pleasant Grove. And it's a fabulous facility, and also education outreach. It's just wonderful. So the Audubon Society does fabulous work. And the last one we're going to talk about is Sierra Club. Now, Sierra Club is distinct to the United States. Audubon and some of these others, like the Nature Conservancy, are global. Sierra is a club, a nature club here in the United States. Now, Canada has Sierra Club also, but it's not affiliated with the U.S. Sierra Club. Sierra Club was started in the 1800s by a man by the name of John Muir. John Muir was the guy who, with Teddy Roosevelt, was the driving force behind the formation of the national park system here in the United States. Sierra Club uses, let me read you their mission statement, to practice and promote the responsible use of the Earth's ecosystems and resources. There's your stewardship again. To educate and enlist humanity to protect and restore the quality of the natural and human environment, and to use all lawful means to carry out these objectives. So that not only do they have activities for their club members, such as hiking expeditions and that sort of thing, but they also are very active in the court system to try to protect the laws that are already in existence, like the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, the Endangered Species Act, all of which have been challenged over the years. I'm going to turn this over to Mr. Broughton. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Fuller. And the question that came in was, is the Trinity River Audubon Center part of the Audubon Society? And yes, it is. That's why the word Audubon is in their name. So it's good that you recognize that. All right, now we are going to move on to hunting and fishing with Mr. Monroe.
Good morning, students. My name is Mr. Monroe, and the time that you're going to be spending with me on your virtual field trip, we're going to be focusing on hunting and fishing and how it affects the environment. Now, hunting and fishing, those are two things that if I had the time, I would just love to do. But there's a correct way to do it. And you know, if you really think about it, people hunted many, many years ago. And I'm thinking back about 12,000 years ago, people hunted mainly 3 species of animals. They hunted camels, they hunted the mammoths, and they hunted these giant armadillos. And they didn't hunt them for sport. They were hunting them for survival. Even in the 1800s, there was a mammal that traveled or it roamed across the plains area called the American bison. And the indigenous people that used that bison, again for survival, they used every part of that animal's body in their way of life. Even on the waste that that animal left, that waste, which they called at that time buffalo chips, was used in making campfires. But today, people hunt and fish for sport. You know, in the year of 2011, the US alone had 13.7 million people hunted animals for sport. 11.6 million of those people, they hunted big game. 4.5 million of those people, they hunted small game. And 2.2 million people, they hunted other animals. So it has become a big sport, especially in the state of Texas. It is a big part of the economy of this state. If you were to go into certain areas where there's farm areas, you would see that some of those farm areas have been converted into what they call wildlife management areas. Now, you would think that would be a place where they're practicing conservation of animals. But those wildlife management areas, guess what? They have what they call tall game fences where the animals can't get over. You heard Miss Fuller talk about how the antelopes were trapped and they couldn't get over a fence and they froze to death. Well, we don't have to worry about, I think, too much of that problem, animals freezing to death. But those farmers that have set up those game management ranches, what they do, they charge people for coming in to hunt. It has become a big sport because when it became a sport, a lot of people were killing animals just for the heads and leaving their carcasses and other parts of their body for the decomposers to come in to get rid of. Of course, I love to hunt, but when I hunt, I'm not hunting truly for sport. I just love to consume it, consume the animal that I have harvested just for food. And a lot of hunters today are still doing that. I grew up in a way of life in northwestern Oklahoma where that was a big part of my life, even as a young person, okay? Now, you might look at harvesting and collecting certain animals as population control. You know, regulations vary from state to state, from county to county, and they basically deal with animals that people love to hunt for sport. Deer, turkey, ducks, and there's regulations that deal with the sex of that animal, maybe how many of those animals that you can harvest, and basically that is to keep that population from dropping too low. Now, a lot of people believe that hunting and even fishing will cause an environmental imbalance. You know, nature has a delicate balance, and human hunting and fishing can have a negative impact on that particular animal or species that's being hunted or caught as a fishing effort. Opponents of hunting and fishing animals have their own way of population control, and humans are not needed to control that species or are in that process. Now, the University of Michigan predicts hunting will be the cause of extinction of about 25% of all animal extinctions during the 21st century. Even with hunting restrictions in place, there are illegal means for hunting, and they are still a very large issue, such as poaching, hunting animals out of season, hunting animals from the road, hunting animals after dark using a spotlight. It is very difficult to catch some people doing this, especially in rural areas. And that's why, especially in this state, there are rewards that are offered if you turn somebody in and they're actually prosecuted, because it is a very negative impact on the environment. You might say, well, hunters may take animals out of the environment, so that could be negative. But you know, with regulations and people having to buy licenses and pay fees and to get park permits to get into a park, a lot of that money that is taken in, guess what? It's put back into the improvement of the environment. Now, we think about hunters coming in and there are only certain species that they can hunt. A lot of people believe that would cause an imbalance. That very well could cause an imbalance. For example, let's say that you have wolves and you have mountain lions that are predators. And if you take enough of those out, and there's only a few of those predators left, the population of their prey, which are herbivores, probably would explode. And you know, when we get overpopulation, that can be a problem with the environment also, especially with the animals, because animals, especially deer, have a wide or long range. And they're going to start wandering, looking for food. And a lot of times they wander into unnatural areas, such as into towns, into any areas where they can find food. And that goes for other animals like bears and coyotes. And when that happens, it runs the risk of that animal being killed or maybe some injuries done to humans. Also, it does damage to the environment, and I'll get into that in just a little bit. But it is believed that over 1 million animals are killed each year because of that wandering effect. Crossing roads, crossing highways, over 1 million animals are killed. Now, the ecosystems that these animals live in, they become overpopulated. You know, take deer, for example. Deer have an appetite for saplings, which puts that forest or that wood area into a danger of becoming a pasture land because of being overpopulated, because they love to consume young trees. Also, deer grazing promotes the spread of ferns, which block sunlight from other plants, therefore hindering a little bit of the growth in the forest. And then when you get overpopulation, you get diseases. And one disease that is really causing the state of Texas Wildlife Department to kind of shudder a little bit and they be concerned is wasting disease. And there's already evidence of wasting disease in the western part of our state. In wasting disease, it affects the deer population, but it can also be spread to other animals that maybe are making up an ecosystem. And that is due to overcrowding. Not enough food because the population of that organism or that animal has grown to such a number. It occurs when an ecosystem can no longer sustain. And the word that we use for that is sustainability, okay? And that lack of food can cause a real big problem. You know, here at the Environmental Ed Center, we have the Post Oak Preserve. And I've been teaching out here for a long time, and I've seen how things have changed there. When I first started teaching out here, we did not have a deer population out here. But now we have a pretty good deer population. Now, the Post Oak Preserve, that's an area that is protected by law. There is no hunting allowed there. And there are certain areas in this state that are set aside for that. And I'm glad. Because if it wasn't protected by law, this deer that we caught on a wildlife camera, he would not be around. At this time, I believe it was last year when this picture was taken of him by a wildlife camera, I estimate that this deer is probably a 5 or 6 year old deer. He's gone beyond what most deer have as a life expectancy if they were somewhere else where there's a season. Now, 2 years ago, there was no gun season in Dallas County. Now there is a gun season in Dallas County. there's a bow season, and there's a muzzle loading season. So regulations have now opened up. Something else that is happening in the Post Oak Preserve is that we now have a population of what we call feral pigs. This is an example of an unwanted animal that has really become invasive, and it is overpopulating. And guess what it's doing? It's doing damage to the environment. Now, with the deer and the turkey and the ducks, there's a season. There's a certain time of the year that you can hunt those. But with the wild hogs, the feral pigs, it is open season on them. And you know what? It's open season because they are out of control. They cause millions of dollars of damage every year to farmers' pasture land and all, just wipe it out. Now, I've been out in the Post Oak Preserve, and it's called the Post Oak Preserve simply because it has a lot of post oak trees, and post oak trees produce a little seed called an acorn, and that acorn is the favorite food of the white-tailed deer. It's the favorite food of the feral pig. It's also the favorite food of squirrels and other animals that might live in the Post Oak Preserve. When these guys come through, they eat up all the acorn. In fact, I'm anticipating that this year is going to be a real hard year for the white-tailed deer, for the squirrels, and even for the feral pigs, because my last trip through the Post Oak Preserve, I didn't see very many acorns being produced by the post oak tree. Okay? Now, listen. Hunting and fishing and farming, a lot of people say that they still remain the biggest threats to wildlife. And what we must do, and the state of Texas is doing an excellent job of this, they have regulations in place that are trying to balance the whole thing out to where the environment is protected, and more importantly, the wildlife is protected, because they have regulations on the sex, the number of a species of animal. If it's a hunting season, you can only take so many of them, and you can only take one or two sex. Just for a perfect example, the wild turkey. The wild turkey, in the spring, you can only hunt for the male, because they know that that female is going to be laying eggs, and those eggs are going to hatch, and those eggs are a source of keeping that species, that wild turkey, populated. With the deer, the female, it is protected, except in instances where there's an overpopulation of the female deer, which we call a doe. Now, where I hunt, there used to be on a weekend after Thanksgiving that you could hunt the female. They got the population down to where it was kind of balanced, where Wildlife Valley just thought it should be, and now they discontinued that. But there are other counties in this state that they designate certain days that you can legally shoot a female. Otherwise, the female, the doe, is protected because she's the one that bears the young. Students, hopefully I've given you an idea about how hunting and fishing's the same way. We have regulations about that. The size of a fish, the number of a certain type of game fish that you can collect, that all goes into place of keeping those species of wildlife populated, so students and young people and old folks like me can enjoy that in the future. Now listen, if you have any more questions about regulations, the Texas Parks and Wildlife Division have a manual that you can go by. It deals with hunting, fishing, and boating regulations. And they used to put out a little booklet. They no longer put that little booklet out. You could get that at Academy or Walmart, but they don't do that anymore. What you have to do is to go online to outdoorannual.com, or you can go ahead and get the app put on your phone, and it'll give you all the information you need. Now, at this time, I'm going to turn it back over to Mr. Broughton, and if you have any questions, you might ask him. And I want you guys to have a good day the rest of the day, and hopefully you've enjoyed this day so far. All right, Mr. Broughton.
Thank you, Mr. Monroe. There weren't any questions related to hunting and fishing, so we are going to move on to recreational vehicles with Mr. Ramirez.
Hello, we're going to quickly talk about boating and its role in spreading invasive species. So when we talk about boating, that's a very popular recreation vehicle, especially during the summertime. So what's common is our recreational vehicles, like our boats, can commonly spread invasive species. So for example, we have, this is our model of a boat, but we have our motor, and we can see that some debris has gotten stuck in it. Also, there's some holes and crevices within the boat itself that can harbor some invasive species. So some common invasive species that we're going to touch on today are the giant Salvinia. It's an aquatic plant. Water hyacinth, it's another aquatic plant. And then the zebra mussel, which is an aquatic animal. And it's important to note that these aquatic organisms not only spread on big boats, but smaller things like kayaks and catamarans. So that's why it's important and why Texas Parks and Wildlife is really stressing the importance of cleaning and drying your boat every time you use it. So I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to look at some images of these common invasives that we have here in Texas. The first one we're going to talk about is the zebra mussel. We do have native mussels here in Texas, and for those that have been to the Environmental Center and participated in our limnology programs, you've probably collected a few of our native freshwater mussels. But the ones that we're looking at here are the zebra mussel. They are an invasive species. They're originally from Europe and Asia. They were introduced into the U.S. in 1988. And the reason they're such a horrible invasive species is because they grow in these dense clusters. So if you take a look at these images of some of these boat propellers and docks, and even debris or trash that you might see in a lake, you can see these dense clusters of these mussels. And one of the reasons that they are so hard to eradicate is because one mussel can produce about 1 million larvae in 1 year. And the larvae are microscopic, so we won't be able to see them. So it's very hard to track their spread if we can't see the larvae. So that's one of the reasons why these are a very bad invasive that we have here in Texas. Now, one of the reasons that they're able to attach so well to boat propellers, boat parts, anchors, boat docks, and even the boat trailers is because they have this special attachment called a bisis, and you can see it here. It's like a very sticky glue-like adhesive that allows it to stick to things, and it is super strong. So that's one of their adaptations that has allowed them to spread so easily, and that's why it's important to really check and clean and dry any boats or any recreation vehicle that you put inside the water. So that is the zebra mussel, and Texas Parks and Wildlife has a big campaign to raise awareness about it. And you can see here the locations where the zebra mussel has been located. And the next thing that we're going to look at is the giant Salvinia. It is an aquatic plant. This is the most recent one that y'all probably seen on the news because it was recently found in Lake Athens near where I live. It's native to South America. It came from Brazil. And the reason that this invasive is so bad is because, as you can see in these pictures, they grow in these dense mats in the ponds and lakes. Those dense mats block out the sunlight, and in turn, it also decreases the amount of oxygen available in that body of water. So it can really be hazardous and really kill a lot of the aquatic organisms because it's blocking sunlight and it's causing that decrease in available oxygen. Another reason why this one is so bad is because it can reproduce rapidly. So it can actually double within about 4 to 10 days. So it has an exponential growth, and it doesn't take long for it to just infest a body of water. And this one was first discovered here in the U.S. in 1998, and it was found in Houston. And since then, it's been found in a variety of different lakes here in Texas and even in North Texas as well. The next one we're going to look at is another aquatic plant. This one is water hyacinth. This one was actually brought here to the U.S. on purpose. It's an ornamental plant. So people actually would buy these to put in their little ponds that they might have on their property. And as you can see, it has that beautiful flower, and that's why people like them. The only problem is it is an invasive, and it outcompetes our native plants for resources. And just like the giant Salvinia, it grows in these dense mats, as you can see here. So it also poses the same problem where it blocks out sunlight and also can decrease the amount of oxygen in a body of water. So this just goes to show us that some invasives were brought here accidentally from one body of water to another, and then some were actually brought here on purpose, and one way or another they got introduced into our natural bodies of water. So there's different ways that invasives can get here into the U.S. Now, when I was in college, we actually went out to Lake Conroe and used rakes and pitchforks to help remove water hyacinth that was located in Lake Conroe. So this is another problem that we have here in Texas. Now, you might be wondering, well, you know, as a student, what can I do? Well, as a student, you can be observant of the organisms that you see in your own neighborhood. And a good example, here's a news article. This was here recently. This was an 11-year-old boy who spotted an invasive beetle called the emerald ash borer. And he was just, you know, in his backyard, he happened to notice this strange, beautiful green beetle. And it turned out being an invasive, a horrible invasive that attacks the ash trees. And because of his finding, he was able to notify the Forest Service, and they were able to take preventative measures to go ahead and chemically treat the trees in the area before an infestation actually occurred. So we call that citizen science, and there's a variety of ways that you can help with citizen science. So if we take a look at this website, it's invasivespeciesinfo.gov. There's a way for you to help in reporting organisms that you find, and some great apps that you can put on your cell phone or your iPad would be iNaturalist. And iNaturalist is a free app. You can just, you know, go out on a nature walk, take pictures of plants or animals that you find. You can upload it to the iNaturalist, and then a community of naturalists can help you identify what you're seeing. And then another one is Seek by iNaturalist. And if you don't know what you're looking at, you can take a look at some photos that are on this iNaturalist app. And it tells you what's in your local area if you put in your zip code. So I highly recommend iNaturalist and Seek by iNaturalist as well. And students and teachers also have a responsibility in preventing the spread of invasive species. And this is a news article from the Smithsonian Magazine about how science teachers were also guilty of releasing invasive species into the environment. So I know a lot of people like to have things like the ball python as a pet, or like the Russian tortoise as a pet, but they do live a very long time. And so sometimes people are not prepared to take care of them for that length of time, and they end up releasing them into the wild. So a lot of the animals that you might use in your classroom, they're not exactly native here to Texas or wherever you may be. So it's always important to be a responsible pet owner as well. And then really quick, it was mentioned earlier with some ATVs here in Texas. ATVs are a very popular recreation vehicle with four-wheelers and dirt bikes, but they also cause a lot of damage to the environment. Very specifically, because these off-road vehicles are so heavy, they cause the soil to be compacted. So these things can weigh upwards between 400 and 1,000 pounds. They are squishing that soil, they're compacting it. It's taking away the air pockets that are in that soil, and it's compacting it really nice and tight. So whenever it rains, it increases the amount of runoff and erosion. And I live in a rural area, and we have a huge problem with people rutting up our park systems that we have. And then also, I'm familiar with farms, and we've been having issues at my in-laws' farms with people just riding dirt bikes and things like that. So it's not against the law to ride dirt bikes or to go boating. Just make sure that if you enjoy nature, that you do so responsibly and in places where it is allowed. So we all like to enjoy nature, go hiking and enjoy boating and things like that, but just make sure that we do it in a correct, responsible way. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing our screen, and we're going to pass it to Mr. Broughton, and he's going to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Ramirez. I'm going to do a quick recap of what we did today. All right, so today we explored the impact of human activities on the environment. During this virtual field trip, we evaluated the effect of human activities, including habitat restoration projects, species preservation efforts, nature conservancy groups, hunting, fishing, ecotourism, all-terrain vehicles, and small personal watercraft on the environment. So we started off by discussing habitat restoration. Then you saw that case study of White Rock Lake. Next, we discussed different nature conservancy groups, then hunting and fishing. And last, you just saw the effects of recreational vehicles on the environment. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. This was our second virtual field trip for environmental systems this year. And so we would like to know what you thought about it. And you could let us know by going to www.tiny.cc/EEC feedback and filling out a short form. When you do that, that helps us improve what we do because we use your comments and feedback to improve our field trips. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye.